Good evening. Tonight we have a very special presenter. His name's Daniel McPherson, and he's a really unique thinker in the SharePoint space. He's got a few claims to fame, and he's the architect behind the very first SharePoint site that went live. He is also the man behind those great SharePoint blog posts on driving user adoption using the badges technique, the Foursquare style. And he's the man trying to solve the SharePoint deployment problems, the one-click installation. And the site is sharevolutionhq.com. So with that, I welcome Daniel McPherson.
So we're going to go on a bit of a journey. And the first place we're going to start is with a genre called knowledge management. And that genre is sort of the genre that I've been in for pretty much my whole life. When I started at Microsoft, I was on Exchange and we were competing with Lotus Notes. And Lotus Notes was sort of the big elephant in the room as far as knowledge management was concerned. So we'll talk a little bit about knowledge management. But for knowledge management, we'll then go on a journey to social computing and talk about what social computing is, what it means, and how it can improve our businesses. And then finally, from social computing, we're going to move on and talk about social analytics, which I think is where some of the coolest stuff is happening. And I think it's a real untapped benefit of social computing. People don't often spend a lot of time on what they can do with social analytics. So let's kick in. First of all, knowledge management. Now I'm going to approach knowledge management from a very restricted definition. Okay, I think one thing to say about knowledge management is that this is a massive discipline. There are entire university departments dedicated to knowledge management. They define it in all sorts of crazy ways, like implicit and tacit and all these sorts of things. I'm not doing that. I'm really looking at knowledge management in a very narrow focus, and that is really getting the information from one person's brain and then moving that across into another person's brain. And this is a common problem companies have. Sharing experience and knowledge more effectively is a big part of driving productivity inside of organisations. So it's a big science, but I'm not going to bore you with the big science. We're going to stick to the details. And yeah, there you go. So moving from there, the next one is social computing. That's really all I'm going to say about knowledge management for now. So social computing, I think this is the bigger question. So for me, social computing, first off, feels a little bit like a green stop sign. It's a bit of an oxymoron. And I don't know, if you're like me, if you sit down with your friends at a dinner party and start telling them how social computing is, they're probably going to look at you a bit strange and sort of think, well, there's nothing social about computing. Every time you're on your computer, you seem to be locked away in your desk in another world. That's not a social endeavour for me. But there's a lot more to it than that. And I think the first thing to be very careful about is that social computing is really full of a lot of marketing. So typically a lot of companies talk about how their products are great at social computing, but it's just the latest, greatest buzzword that people attach to their products in the hope that it will make them sell better. So no matter what you're buying these days, you'll probably find a little checkbox that says, is it social? Yes, tick that. This is absolutely social. So there's a lot of snake oil, and there's a lot of misinformation, and the whole word has in a way become quite devalued. What is this thing, social computing? It's everything to everyone. But if I was to boil it down to just one thing, if I was to describe social computing to you in just one sentence, then to me social computing is basically where the knowledge management train has dropped us off. Okay, so up until the last few years, we've been talking about knowledge management, knowledge management, knowledge management. Companies have had knowledge management initiatives. As consultants, we've gone and said, we want to help you do knowledge management better, etc., etc., etc. We don't do that anymore. And instead, what we're going to be doing is talking about social computing instead. So where we did talk about knowledge management, it's a search and replace. Now we're talking about social computing. So let's drill into social computing a little bit more and put some substance onto it. All right, so in the old days, there were big companies. And effectively, it was big companies that had big knowledge management problems. And because of that, this is where innovation happened. So if there was ever to be innovation in knowledge management, it typically occurred inside of departments, inside of big organisations. In addition to that, knowledge management had the mass of people. So they had a large number of people who they wanted to share experience and knowledge more effectively. They had the networks. So I'm talking about going back sort of 10, 15 years ago where networks were primarily the domain of big companies. We didn't have networks at home like we do today. And then they also had the software. They had big high-end enterprise software which is specifically geared up to providing a platform on which you can build knowledge management systems. So in the old days, if you're in knowledge management and you were doing innovation, then you probably lived inside of a big company. That's where you spend your time and that's where you applied the solutions to the problems that you were working on. But something's changed. So over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a huge shift. And that shift is really social computing. So that shift is, instead of the innovation happening inside of big companies, as far as knowledge management is concerned, the innovation is now happening out on the internet, and it's happening by people here in the room. We are the ones that are innovating in knowledge management space. So when you look at it, the reason why the innovation is coming from outside of companies now is because that now is where the massive people are that have the problem, they have the knowledge management problem. And if we look at the network, well, now we have the internet, the world's biggest and most complex network ever devised. And in addition to that, we also have the software. So there's incredible new cloud-based systems that are way beyond anything we could have imagined inside of enterprise before. They make Lotus Notes really look like a very primitive piece of software. So putting these together, that means innovation in knowledge management is happening outside of companies. It's happening on the internet today, and we're the ones driving that forward. And I think if I sort of stop and give some sort of evidence as to this assertion that I've made, I think what I'd say is that it wasn't until Facebook came along that I actually managed to share my photos with my mother. So I was over on the other side of the planet, and I was always trying to show her photos I was working on, but it was always very difficult. It was email photos. She wouldn't check email. Email was too complicated. Facebook came along, and finally she could see my photos. And when you drill into it, what's a photo? A photo is really just a piece of knowledge. And so even though it's done in a personal sense, it's still a form of knowledge management. Sharing those photos with my mother is actually a form of knowledge management. So that's my evidence. Okay, my evidence is purely based on my mother being able to do it. Okay, which is pretty common. You'll find that a lot in technology presentations. So moving along, let's sort of drill into this again and try and make it even more relevant to what you do day to day. So let's talk about communication and then look at what can happen to communication when you apply some social computing principles to that communication. Now communication obviously isn't knowledge management, it's just one small part of knowledge management. Often you'll communicate as a way of sharing knowledge. So I've got 4 very common ways of communicating, and you probably do these every day. The first one is instant messaging. So you might jump on Skype and do an instant message, Messenger, or any one of those, even ICQ for those who go back far enough. All of these are examples of instant messaging. We do it every day. There's email. We're all familiar with that. There's picking up your mobile phone and talking to someone. Radical, I know, but that's a form of communication as well. And then there's just chatting to someone, so maybe having meetings and all those sorts of things. Now, if you look at all these different ways of sharing knowledge, then they work really well in a small context. So when you're talking with you and perhaps your colleague, or maybe a small group of colleagues, all of these things work. But when you start to scale that up, so when you've got a much larger number of people, then all of these ways of communicating really break down. And despite solutions to that problem being around for a long time, companies are really lagging behind the adoption of some of these other technologies. So let's have a look. Now we've got the same set of communication technologies, but with a lot more people. So if we take instant messaging, for example, that doesn't work when you've got a large number of people. I mean, it's impossible to have an instant messaging conversation with more than about 15 people. It just degrades to a mass of scrolling letters. Email, absolutely. You can send an email to the entire company. Do we like it? No, typically we pretty much hate it. And when you reply to it, people hate it even more, and it starts to break down. In fact, you can get into these horrible doomsday loops where you get a denial of service attack by people replying all and saying, please don't send me this email anymore. I think we'll probably experience that too. Picking up the phone, sure, you can do conference calls, but they break down after a certain number. I mean, we have the same sort of thing. All of these break down when you start to scale up the number of people you're trying to communicate with. So in their place, let's look at what happens when we add social. So instant messaging can become a technology like Twitter. So how many people here in the room are Twitter users? Twitter users, whatever the thing is. Okay, so a few. All right, check out Twitter if you're not on Twitter, okay, because then you'll get what I'm talking about here. But Twitter's one way that you can take an instant messaging communication and take it out to a much larger audience. From an email perspective, maybe you can look at blogging. Okay, in each one of these cases, it doesn't do an exact replacement, but it replaces a large section of the sort of communication we used to do on email. The telephone might go to doing podcasting. And finally, meeting with people, you might be able to use videos and do a broadcast of your meeting instead. So all of these mechanisms move communication from a personal communication and they move it across into a social communication. And all of these mechanisms are much more effective at communicating knowledge to a much larger audience of people. And that's where the innovation on the internet has really succeeded. It's scaled knowledge management. And for that reason, it's valuable and beneficial inside of organisations today as well. And it's our job here to take these benefits to organisations, explain these benefits to them, so we can all have a better time inside of our offices. So here's a headline from May 2005, which was, blogs will change your business. Okay, so that's what, 6-7 years ago. How many people think that blogs have changed their business? Just a couple. And that's exactly the response that I get whenever I ask that question. But if I was in the room full of people who are in the newspaper industry, the answer would be pretty radically different, and that blogs have absolutely changed their business. So this was a social technology that had a very disruptive effect on a very big industry. So unfortunately, blogs often is considered to be a bit of a failure today. But actually, in actual fact, it's been an incredibly disruptive technology, an incredibly successful technology, and as a technology, it's still continuing to grow. So there's another question that I ask people when I'm doing a presentation like this, and that is, on your intranet, so the intranet that you work on today inside of your companies, or perhaps the intranets you work on with your customers, is it as easy for people who use that intranet to publish a page onto that intranet as it is for them to send an email? How many people can put up their hand and say, on my intranet, it's as easy to publish a page on it as it is for me to send an email? Sure, but I'm saying everyone. So I think the broad majority of the audience of that intranet. I mean, if you're the intranet editor, fine, it might be easy enough. But for the entire audience of the intranet, on the balance, is it as easy or is it more difficult?
Like a blog.
Yeah, exactly. So the bottom line is, whenever I do it, not many people put their hands up. And that's kind of an incredible thing, given that we've had this intranet thing for about 12, 15 years or more, that even after all this time, we still can't say that it's as easy to publish onto that blog as it is to send an email. And the other weird thing that happens, if you talk to CIOs or people at a fairly senior level in the organisation about knowledge management, then one of the complaints they'll always come back with is the knowledge is out there, it's even in digital form, but it's locked away. And it's locked away inside of people's email inboxes. And so you can exactly see why. People will do the simplest and easiest thing in front of them at a time to achieve something, and that's just sending an email. Well, that's what they'll do. So we need to make it as easy for them to publish as it is for them to send an email, and maybe then we'll start to unlock some of the information that people are storing away in their inboxes. And we'll come back later as to why there's even more importance in doing that in a second. But there's another little thought experiment that I'd like you to do before I do that. And that is, I'd like you to imagine that we're running out of keystrokes. You know, just in your head, imagine we've hit peak keystroke, okay? The number of keystrokes that are going to be manufactured in the world, we've reached a peak. We're now on a decline in the number of keystrokes. So we have to really treat keystrokes with a lot more respect, with a lot more value. How would that change your behaviour? What would you do differently if we were running out of keystrokes? And I think the answer to that is that we'd start to share more. You know, we would use blogging, technologies like blogging, to maximise the benefit of every single one of those keystrokes that we press. And of course, we're not running out of keystrokes, that's the good news. But it's still a healthy way to start to think about how you manage the knowledge you've got when you write it down, when you put it into a digital form. But it's not always about you. And this is where we now go on the next stage of our journey, which is going beyond social computing and over into social analytics. To justify social computing inside your organisations, you don't have to look at just the individual utility that you get out of using one of those systems. Absolutely, it's great that you can blog, and that's a fantastic benefit. It's great that you can build a video and upload it onto a site and share that video with people in your organisation. Again, really, really great. But that's not where the benefits stop for the organisation. And so if you do just stop there, then you're leaving a significant amount of benefit on the table. And that benefit comes in the form of social analytics, and that's really where we're going into next. And social analytics is looking at the data that's produced socially in aggregate and find the little gems of information that help you run your business more effectively. So what is social analytics? Basically, it's grabbing all of that wisdom that we produce, filtering it down, or all of the knowledge we produce, filtering it down and finding the wisdom. That's really what social analytics is all about. And you've probably heard this term, the wisdom of crowds. Well, effectively, that's what it's all about. You've got the crowds. You've got this incredible crowd, which is the people working in your organisation. They're incredibly knowledgeable about the business that you're in. There's some fantastic wisdom out there. How do you catch to that more effectively to steer your business more effectively? That's where social analytics comes in. I've got some really good examples here in a second which will show you just the sorts of creative things that you might be able to do with this information. Okay, so we've taken a few steps here. Let's try and make it real now by applying it to business as best we can. We can build on the knowledge management, social computing and social analytics to start to do things that are probably a problem in our day-to-day lives. So the first thing is, how do we deal with information overload? That's a big problem. It's continuing to get worse. How do we deal with information overload? Well, social analytics, social computing can start to help us with those things. We can see trends emerging earlier. We can make better predictions. We can do something even as simple as seeing if people in our organisation are happy. That's pretty cool. Is my organisation happy? Have I done something wrong recently? A policy that's come out that's changed the happiness people feel in the organisation? How do we measure people's contributions and see who are the best performers from a contribution point of view, who are sharing the best knowledge? And how can we drive user adoption? So all of these things, I'm going to go through a few examples to sort of show you how search computing can contribute on each one of these levels, and we'll look at those. So I'm just waking you up with the sound effects there. Hopefully that worked. Not convinced. It went all last time, okay? So I'm going to use lots of examples from the internet, all right? Because as I said before, most of the innovation that's happening is happening out on the internet. So it's hard to find great examples of this innovation happening inside of companies. But SharePoint, to bring it back to SharePoint, if you were to take some of this innovation and translate it into the enterprise, then you would absolutely do it on the SharePoint platform. That's the best place for building some of these tools. So even though they're internet examples, they're absolutely applicable to the intranet and they're applicable to SharePoint. So before I go on, when I'm looking for a solution to a problem, often what I'll do is sort of look back in time. So for problems today, they're probably not a new problem. It's probably a problem that somebody else has solved in the past. So it always helps to look back in time and see how somebody else solved the problem. And so for me, information overload, the problem that I look back on is the printing press. I sort of imagine this printing press sitting in the corner. They've just finished it. They've just done their first print run. There's these old guys got their elbows up on the side of the printing press, big white beards, and they're sort of saying, pretty happy with themselves. This is fantastic, guys. We've now invented this incredible thing called the printing press. We're able to produce an unlimited number of books. This is an incredible advance for humanity. But we have a problem. How are we going to read them all? How can we possibly read all of these books? They've got, effectively, an information overload problem. And they solved this problem. We don't today think we've got an information overload because Amazon's in existence. Okay, we've kind of solved that problem. And so the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that's a rule in computers that even in my short time in IT, I've seen happen time and time again. And there's a good example of that too, is that so when I started my career, we had these big mainframe style computers, so AS400 type things, and everything was centralized. You had these dumb terminals, and then PCs came along. We said, dumb terminals, they don't work. The centralized model, it's not going to work. Okay, what we need to do is we need to move down. We need to do more stuff now on top of our PC. So we went from server-based model to client-server, then to just sort of smart PC-based model. And then the internet came along. We sort of said, okay, this is fantastic, but now we need to shift everything back up via the browser. Now we want these web servers, and we want everything delivered down to these effectively dumb terminals, which is your browser. So everything's now a server-based model. And then Gmail came along and said, that's good, but we can't get the user interface we want. So now we're going to do more stuff in JavaScript, effectively moving it back down into a client-side model. So another example of how the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that will continue. And with the iPad, we see the emergence now of more client-based technologies where people are now building native clients that they'd stopped building a little while back. So the printing press is the same. So search computing provides us a way to manage information overload. And so the example here is that it's a bit like a book club. Social computing in essence becomes like a bit of a book club. Book clubs were a way that we solved information overload. Because what you would do is you'd get together with your friends and you'd talk about the books that you're reading. And because you knew your friends, you knew what they liked, you could better determine which books you might like as well. And so it would reduce the total number of books that you needed to read the best ones, the ones that you'd probably like the best. So book clubs are a good analogy. They solve the problem socially. Our social connections helped us find the right books to read. And that's exactly the same on the internet. Working with other people, that social interaction helps us work out which information on this massive internet that we live on, which information there is the best information for us to read. So whenever you interact with something, you make it better. That's sort of the concept of social. So if you go back to my example where we're publishing something on a blog, not only are you sharing that more effectively by just making it out there instead of locked away in an inbox, but you're also giving other people the opportunity to make that information better for you. So the information over time will get better and better and better. Everything you do with a piece of content makes that piece of content better, even if it's just reading it. So if the only thing you do is go to that piece of content and read it, then believe it or not, it's still making it better. Because what you've done is the server knows that you've read that piece of content. And if lots of people read a particular piece of content, that's telling you something about that content. It doesn't necessarily say that it's a fantastic piece of content, but it does say that a lot of people felt that this would be relevant to what they're doing. And when you combine that with all the other sort of social techniques that are around the outside of that, whether it's commenting on it, sharing it, retweeting it, liking it, favoriting it, editing it, rating it, liking or tagging it, all of those things together really start to make that content a lot better. And by combining them and looking at the sort of attention they've attracted from your social peers, you can start to work out what you should read. You can start to find the best stuff in your organisation bubbles to the top. And that's incredibly useful for us. Yeah. So one of the things about SharePoint is that aggregating content is very difficult, and that's one of the things you often need to do. You know, if you want to find the best stuff on your internet, you need to aggregate the content together and then sort of distill out the best content. So aggregation is very difficult. But there is one way to do it in SharePoint, and I'm not going to go into technical detail, but I can if you'd like me to. But basically there's this concept of search in SharePoint. It comes with a search engine. And while that's great for searching for stuff, you can also use it as part of your application infrastructure. So you can build solutions that leverage search, not just for finding relevant content, but for aggregating content. So it's a great way of pulling information from, regardless of where it is, into a single view, where you can then sort and filter and group and do all those sorts of things. So here's an example of where, you know, on our blog portal, we've found the most discussed content, and that, you know, the number of comments that a piece of content attracts could tell you something about that content. It's quite a controversial piece of content, so perhaps that's something I should read. And there's other things there as well. So moving on from search, here are some more creative things that you can do with search. Okay, so these are some of these examples that you can use from the internet. So how many people have heard of Google flu trends? Couple of nods. All right. So basically, Google did a fantastic example of where social analytics can really help. In that they went and looked, they monitored all the search terms that people are entering into that Google search box, and they looked for terms which were related to the flu. So they thought, well, if someone's looking for cough or cold or sneeze or these sorts of symptoms, something like that, then maybe they've got the cold. Maybe they've got a cold or the flu, I should say. And so they mapped this out. And this is an example of what that mapping looked like. This is how they predicted where the flu was at any point in time across the US and across the world. And so the incredible part about this is that the statistics that came from Google were actually more accurate than the Center for Disease Control in America. They were earlier and they were more accurate. So here in the video you can see Google flu trends, what it's predicting in terms of the flu, and then here's the CDC. So you can see that Google flu has detected a big increase in the flu. It's 2 weeks ahead of where the CDC is. And then what you see after that is the CDC reports suddenly take a big upturn to reflect exactly what we found via Google. So there it is. So that's incredible. You know, that indirectly Google is able to track flu around the world. And the incredible thing here as well is they've just done this as well for dengue fever. So they've just released a new one which is focused on dengue fever. And it's a great way of showing how in aggregate this data is still valuable. There's lots of really valuable stuff that you can get from that. So Google also released another new tool which is called Google Correlate. And it's sort of basically what you do is you give it some data, like for example a time span, and then you ask it to correlate that to a search term. Okay, so for example here, this is how they started to work out which terms correlated to flu, because they passed in the data from the CDC around where the flu was tracking, and then they correlated that data to search terms that people were using. And then moving forward, they could start to predict it, because then they knew the search terms that correlated in the past with the data from the CDC. So that's the example there. There's the sort of search terms, treatment for flu. These people were searching for this, and this correlates very closely to flu in a particular area. Here's another example. This is the rainfall in America. So over on the left-hand side, what you have is the annual rainfall across America. So what Google did is they took all the statistics around rainfall and they uploaded it into Google Correlate. And they said, right, here's the data we've got. Now tell me what search terms correlate with this data. And on the right-hand side, what you can see is the correlation. And that is a Disney vacation package. Okay, so if people are searching for Disney vacation package, that's a good proxy for determining the annual rainfall in your state, in aggregate. Incredible stuff. So you can see here, this is where people were searching, the volume of search terms for looking for Disney search package, and here's the actual rainfall. So you can see that it's not 100% accurate, of course, but it gives you a bit of an indication about the correlation between the search term and that particular event, which is factual behind the scenes. You can do this yourself. Okay, so this is the nice thing about Google Correlate. You can go up there, you can put in your own data, and you can do your own correlations and work out what search term correlates to the data or the trend that you're trying to follow. It's interesting stuff. I mean, it's sort of a bit mind-boggling. I can't say that my brain's big enough to necessarily comprehend all of this. I'd love to be able to spend more time on it, but I think there's some really interesting stuff when you look at data in aggregate. So there's a few other things I want to show. Here's another quick example. So this is another one, Google Trends or Insights. You can go up here and put in some search terms, and basically by doing that you can see when SharePoint released. So again, it's just another example of Google didn't know when SharePoint was released. They had no idea what the release dates for SharePoint were. But by looking at search terms, it can have a pretty good guess about when it thinks those things were released. Okay. So now we're going real time. So here's the thing about Twitter. How many people think that Twitter will make money? How many people would buy shares in Twitter if you could? Not many people? A couple of people would buy shares in Twitter? The general consensus is that Twitter is this big bubble thing and it's not going to make money and it's overvalued and all that sort of stuff. So if you don't want to actually buy stocks in Twitter yourself, then maybe one thing you'd like to do is buy stocks based on what is said on Twitter. And so some PhD students did that. They looked at stocks that were being tweeted about and then they made investments on those stocks. And they found they got a 15% return on investment from doing that. So Twitter became quite a useful way of predicting a market. Which again, going back to the enterprise, perhaps you could apply this by looking at what people are talking about on your microblogging system internally to work out where your product innovation or direction on product should go. It helps you predict trends. It helps you predict where things are going by harnessing the wisdom in your crowds. But I think the other thing, the bigger impact that Twitter has had, is that it's kind of beaten all of these companies. Now, all these companies are examples of mainstream media. They've been around for a long time, and they've got incredibly well-established businesses. But Twitter is faster than all of them at getting the news wherever it's happening in the world. So no matter what the event is, if you look back over any event that's happened, any large event that's happened over the last few years, whether that's the original uprising in Libya, or it's the nuclear crisis in Japan, or the tsunami in Japan, or the earthquakes in Christchurch, whatever it is, the best news and the first news has come from Twitter. That's been the way to keep your finger absolutely on the pulse. So Twitter's been it. And the other thing I'll say about Twitter is that it's already the #3 search engine in the world, which is a big surprise to people usually. So they see everyone's always talking about Google and Bing and then Yahoo, and no one ever mentions the fact that Twitter's a great place to be searching for stuff. But actually, Twitter is the #3 search engine in the world. And the other thing that sort of came home to me is the fact that we'd all been using Google for so long, and we were completely blind to this incredible gap in the Google product. And that gap was the last half an hour. The gap was the last hour. It was the last 4 hours. It was the last day. You just naturally would never go to Google if you wanted to search for something that just happened. You wouldn't search for that in Google. But why? Why did we get trained not to search for stuff that just happened in Google? I mean, it didn't even occur to Google. They didn't even try and solve a problem here. They just tried to increase the speed of their crawlers, and they're never going to get there. They're never going to get to real time. So Twitter solved that for them, to the point where Google actually went and licensed the feed from Twitter in order to supplement their index with the things that are happening right now. So in fact, this sort of was drawn home to me one time when I couldn't get onto MSDN, and I didn't know if MSDN was down. And so I was going to tweet on Twitter to say, look, is MSDN down? I thought, well, rather than asking people, why don't I just do a search for it? Is MSDN down? Look at the last 5 minutes. And sure enough, there are other people saying MSDN is down. And you can do that now on Google. So you can say, is MSDN down? And it will tell you. You just go to the latest, and you'll see the Twitter feed coming in here right at the top of Google. So I think that, for me, that clearly says that Twitter's got incredible value. It clearly says that Twitter's got a pretty big future, and I think that it's already massively profitable, although they don't really talk about it too much. The Google license alone, I think, would be pretty good. How many people have heard of the Facebook Gross National Happiness Index? No one? This is one of my favourite things on the internet. When I found this, the Gross National Happiness Index of me went up through the roof, I think. So here's what they did. All right, there's lots of people on Facebook, which, as we'll talk about later, and they're interacting with Facebook constantly, and they're updating their status constantly. And so what Facebook thought would be a cool thing to do is take a look at all of those status updates, run them through a natural language processing engine, and work out if the status update was happy or sad. Straightforward. Now, based on whether those updates were happy and sad, they want to put that on a graph and see if it corresponds with sad times during the year. And this is what they found. So you can see that by doing this, they were able to predict pretty accurately where Halloween was, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve, and Valentine's Day. All of them corresponded to happy or sad status updates on top of Facebook. If we're in the United Kingdom, you can see Christmas, New Year's, and Valentine's Day. Overall, the English, as you'd expect, are a little bit less enthusiastic about happiness or sadness than the Americans. So there's less days, a little bit more of a subtle sort of graph. And then the Aussies, we also get a look in. So Christmas, New Year's, and Australia Day, which is nice. Australia Day also appears over on our chart. There's a bit of a strange thing about Australia, though. I'm not really sure what happened to the last half of the year, or this period here. Maybe there was a bit of fallout from the Michael Jackson death or something, I'm not really sure. We didn't really quite fully recover from about that period. I did this, what was that, sorry?
No, public holidays.
Yeah, well, that could be it as well. Exactly. Yep. And you can see the weekends and things too. That's the other thing that comes out, is when weekends are happening and all that. We seem to be a bit sadder on weekends, which is a bit strange, but I need to drill into the data a little bit more to have a look at some of these things. I also did one for India as well, and Diwali is out of this world. I mean, that's an incredible peak for India as well, which again corresponds perfectly to what goes on in India at different times of the year too. So there you go. So the way I see applying this to companies is that, I don't know, when I was working at Microsoft, every year we'd have this big survey, which was the Organisational Health Index survey. And it's a bit like a census. You know, they have this massive, massive list of questions, you know, basically saying, are you happy? Yes. You know, are you really happy? Yes, I'm really happy. Are you really, really happy? Yes, I'm really, really happy. And the thing is, you knew it was a survey. You knew you were filling out a survey. You knew what sort of response people wanted by you filling out the survey. And yeah, it was anonymous, but yeah, it's not really anonymous, is it? And all those sorts of things. So it wasn't really, I don't know if it's really all that accurate to get response that way. By following people's behaviour and inferring things indirectly, I don't know, but I think you get a slightly more accurate picture of what's going on in people's minds and what's going on in the people inside of your organisation. So again, this is live on the internet, so you can go up there and play this with yourself. Lots of countries in there. Brazil's probably in there, I'm sure. So you can check out all different countries to see if your status updates on Facebook map back to happy times in your country's calendar. So there you go. All right, so it's demo time. All right, so here's another tool that got released actually just this week. And you can play with this. So here it is. It's called Twitter Analytics for Excel. Okay, so what you do is you download an Excel spreadsheet from Microsoft, so they've made this available, and you put it in a small add-in into Excel, and you put in a search term and press enter. And it goes out to Twitter and it pulls back all the tweets that are related to that particular topic. So it does a big search and gets all the results back, chucks them into Excel for you. And then it does lots of analytics over the top of that. So today I put in SharePoint and pulled back all the tweets that people have been making about SharePoint. And so what you can see is the number of tweets per day. So you can see that 25, 26, something significant happened here on the 28th. I mean, we need a bit more data to be sure, but it looks like the number of tweets went almost doubled, or 1.5 times more tweets at that point. Why is that? Well, it's because SharePoint Service Pack 1 got released. So something happened. And again, if you're in a company, you can just look at the volume of tweets and go, right, something unusual has happened, and then drill into what that might be. You can see the top hashtags. So you can see that jobs. There's lots of people looking for jobs. SharePoint's a great market if you're looking for a job right now. You can see that there. You can see the top mentions. So who gets mentioned a lot. So by doing this, and this is quite interesting if you drill into it in more detail, but you know, if you go to talk to some of these big fancy consulting firms, you know, big companies will pay big consulting firms a lot of money to do all this sort of psychological analysis of your company and drill in and find out who the influencers are, who the connectors are, who the networkers are. And you know, apparently by doing this, you can more effectively influence your organisation. You know, well, you can do that by using a little tool like this too, because when you tweet something, you might say mention Andrew, and so you can start to see that there's some sort of relationship between Andrew and I. And then other people might retweet what you say. So if I say something and people retweet it, then that probably says that that was an important thing. So something that was said there, other people thought was important. And the more retweets, the more credibility you might have. So this helps you derive those things so you can start to see who the influencers are in your organisation, who the connectors are in your organisation. And again, the same thing you used to pay these fancy consulting organisations a lot of money for, you can do by just using a spreadsheet and looking at your Twitter stream. The other thing it does in here is across the bottom of the tabs you've got, so you can focus in on people. So here you can see who the top tweeterers are. I'm not sure if that's a word, by the way, don't use it in Scrabble. But the top tweeterers are in there. You can see who gets mentioned the most. Lots of stuff in there. You can get the tone. So this is what I was talking about before, about looking at organisations and finding out whether there's a positive or a negative thing. You can do that today on different Twitter feeds. So if you're Microsoft, you could potentially do this and then see if people are feeling positive about SharePoint and negative about SharePoint at any point in time. So again, if you're just looking to see how your product's performing in the market, this might be just one input into that process. And you can see that people largely are saying pretty neutral things, but there is more positive than negative, which is always good to see if you're in the SharePoint business like I am. And there's a lot of details there that tells you the tweets that have come in. And over here, you've got the tone dictionary. So this is actually how it does it. It's a pretty simplistic model. I think Facebook's model is a lot more complicated than this. But you can see they've taken a fairly simple way of just having words and assigning them a weight. And then they use that to do the analysis to work out the tone. I think it's very simplistic. Facebook's is much more complicated. But it's not a bad way to go. And there's some sample code there too. So one of the things I'm planning to do, if I get a bit of time, is to write this for SharePoint and just see how that works. So it's a free tool. Download it, put in your favourite topic, and see how you go. But yeah, it's out there. Okay. So going back to MC. Thank you. All right. So here's another example of what you can do with some of this information. That is, you can look at your reputation and your influence. And I'm pretty skeptical about some of this stuff. I don't necessarily believe this is a fantastic way of rewarding people in an organisation or anything like that, but it just gives you another input into the processes. So there's a site called Clout that it basically analyses all of your Twitter stream, and they start to work out things about you. And so this is my Clout profile. So I've got a score of 45, which is fantastic. I'm really happy to have a score of 45. Don't really know what that means, but that's the score I've got. And this is big for geeks too, because geeks like comparing their score with other people. So it's sort of, this is a way of virally getting their solution to take off. Anyway, what I thought was more interesting is this graph that they've come up with. So it sort of describes what the information is that's inside of your Twitter stream. And actually it's pretty accurate in that, when I tweet, I largely tweet about SharePoint. That's really all I tweet about. And so what it's done here is it's got focused and consistent. It's put most of my tweet activity down into that bottom corner. I'm focused and I'm consistent. I tweet about really just one thing. That's all I do all day. And I think that sort of information can be useful, especially if you start to apply it out into other different scenarios as well. So it just said to me this is an accurate way of looking at what's in my Twitter stream. So that's the summary of the first part that I had. And I think we have a bit of a break and come back and talk about some other aspects of social computing, including a couple more demos. I'll try and get to a few more demos in the next section. But hopefully that's been a pretty good introduction to this whole social computing thing and where it fits. So the next part of the topic is I've got two demos which show you how you can bring some social computing innovation onto SharePoint directly. So I've built some tools to show you that. And then we'll talk about some of the competitors that are out there for SharePoint and why they've been successful. So we'll look at YouTube and Facebook and all those sorts of things. So I actually put this next deck I actually put together for SharePoint people because there's a lot of people in SharePoint that are pretty terrified about what's going on in the social space. And they're pretty terrified because they get the feedback from their end users that SharePoint's not good enough, it's not user-friendly enough, it's not efficient enough, and rather than use the internal systems that IT is providing or the business is providing, they'd rather use Facebook or they'd rather use YouTube or they'd rather use WordPress. And actually they're going outside of the company, and then once they go outside the company, there's a lot of data leakage, and people start to lose control of that important company data, and it all starts to break down. And we had a good example with the company that I did some work at, that they would have people walking around on rigs. Every camera's got a phone in it now. They'd find a safety problem, they'd take a photograph of the safety problem and then put it up on Flickr. And they'd do that because that was easy. uploading to Flickr is really easy, but there's nothing more terrifying than having safety issues up on a public website like that. So, so people inside of companies, they're finding it very difficult to present alternatives that are as good as these sites that are out on the internet. So this section was really about trying to demystify some of the sites that are out there, give my impression about why these sites succeeded, and really just try and make it a little bit less scary about the sites that are out there. So there's no facts here. This is just my opinion on how these sites succeeded and how they got to where they are today. So the first one is Facebook. I think we've probably all seen the movie. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal website. So here's a quick statistic. It was started in February 2004. It's got 750 million active users on it today. Now there's a really important thing to be said about 750 million active users. They define an active user as someone who logs on at least once every 2 days. Okay, that's awesome end user engagement. Okay, you talk about sticky websites. This is an incredibly sticky website. You will often see big websites like that claim, yeah, we've got 300,000 accounts. You know, it's like, yeah, sure, but most of them don't visit anymore. They signed up once and never came back. These are people who come back day in, day out. And I think, you know, it's slowly starting to take over the world. There are a few holdouts, like India and Brazil is a big holdout as well with Orchid, I think. Yep, it's big, and India is big on Orchid as well. But I noticed even having spent time in India for the last year, it's slowly more and more people are coming across onto Facebook. And that's that network effect, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So the key thing about Facebook is they won the social graph. Okay, they were the first ones to really understand that a map of who it is that we know is important to nearly every application. And so if you go back in time, you know, often you'd find that every site had a username and password, but not many sites had the concept of friends. Whereas if you look at every single site that launches today, they've all got a concept of friends. So nearly every application, it's a basic fundamental of that application that has this concept of friends. It's as core to solutions today as it is a password and username. So it's just a given. And because Facebook won that social graph, they became a platform play. So they became the platform that other solutions could build on top of because they already had that relationship in place. And getting that relationship in place helped you grow your application. The best example of this is Zynga. You know, all these, I'm sure you guys have been asked to help mow your friends' lawns on Zynga, whatever it is they do on there. But Zynga's been an absolute phenomenon, huge, massive games that run on Facebook. And they all use Facebook as a platform, and they all use Facebook as a platform because it's got that social graph. It knows who your friends are. I think there are two other really interesting things about Facebook. One is that none of the information in Facebook is inside of Google. And it's obvious, but that's incredible. I mean, how did a site become that successful without even being in Google? So the number one way that people find web pages on the internet, you can't use that to find pages on Facebook. It's completely locked out. It's completely its own walled garden. So that's incredible. They did it without Google. The other thing is they've made some incredibly tough decisions, and I've really liked watching this because often on many solutions I'm working on, it's sort of like whatever the user wants, the user gets. You know, the user is always right, and they always tell you what they want, and because they tell you what they want, that must be what they want. This has happened time and time again with Facebook, only they've been smart. They've actually ignored their users time and time again. And the best example of this is when they introduced a news feed. So Facebook didn't always have the news feed. They had your status updates and friends and all that sort of stuff. But you had to actually go to your friend's page to find that information. It didn't sort of come to you on this news feed. So Facebook went and introduced the news feed. And while it didn't expose any more information than you could find before, people felt that it was like a massive invasion of privacy and that that this information shouldn't be displayed in that way. And there were actually groups on Facebook that had millions of users telling Facebook to stop, to roll back that feature, to eliminate that feature. Facebook just ignored them all the way through. And I think now it's just a given that that's there, and it's probably one of the most core features on Facebook. And keep in mind that when Facebook had that million users telling them to roll it back, Facebook wasn't as big as it was today. That was a substantial audience of their users. They plowed through. And I think, again, as solution designers, part of our responsibility is to lead our users. Part of our responsibility is to help them see the way, because we spend our lives all day, every day, looking at these solutions, understanding what they can do for people. So anyway, it's a slight distraction, but I've admired Facebook for that, and I'll contrast it in a second, a little bit later too. Next one is Twitter, which we've talked a little bit about already. So started in March 2006, and they are signing up 460,000 people per day. That's how many people are signing up to the service. Again, it's an incredible growth rate. It's just been the awesome hockey stick type turn. And it kind of reborn the real-time web. So we talked about how search is now, Google has now got Twitter inside of it. So that's that real-time aspect coming back. One thing a lot of people don't know is Twitter was a side project. Okay, someone didn't sit down and invent Twitter. They were actually working on a video solution, and as a side project, they just built this little thing which did status updates, and that became the company. And it's an incredibly interesting story. So if you do have some time, go back and read about how Twitter was found. Yeah, I won't go into it. The other thing it did is it made subscriptions easy. So it has a different approach to the social graph than Facebook does. Facebook is kind of like, I'm your friend, I'm your friend, you're my friend. It's kind of this reciprocal relationship. Whereas Twitter doesn't have that reciprocal relationship. It's very much, I follow you. So it's a one-way thing. You can choose to follow me back, but you don't have to. So it's a very different way of looking at the social graph. And that's kind of why both solutions have managed to carve out their own space. And they don't really conflict with each other too much. It's also got a really good example of a positive constraint. I think, again, no one would have thought that limiting your status update to 140 characters would be a good idea. I think everyone would say, like, why are you restricting that? Why can I only write 140 characters? This is so frustrating. I've got this piece of art that I need to post, but it's 143 characters. And that's really annoying, But that's a positive constraint that really drove the success of the platform. And again, I'll come back to that from SharePoint a little bit later on. There was also a lot of user-driven innovation inside of Twitter. So they didn't invent the hashtag. They didn't invent the @mention. None of these things were features in the product that Twitter invented and released. All of them were bottom-up. So users started to use it in this way. Twitter then grabbed it and said, that's a good feature. We're going to incorporate that in the product. And away it went. So there was some interesting things about why Twitter, I think, has been successful. YouTube. I started in February 2005, and it does 50 million video streams every hour. I'm pretty terrified of going to the YouTube homepage because you end up, 3 or 4 hours of your life disappear while you surf around from video to video. I mean, it's an incredible thing. I don't have a TV, so everything I do is really via media sites like this, and it's incredible the sort of new ways of presenting shows happen via these sorts of platforms. It was a real viral success. So the way YouTube really took off, or one of the ways it really took off, was MySpace was big. And it was the biggest social network out there at the time, but there was no way of doing videos. And so the innovative thing that YouTube did is they said, well, we'll host the videos for you, and you can put them wherever you like. So you can put the video inside of MySpace. That's not a problem. We don't mind. And that was a bit of a mental flip, because at the time, everyone was really focused on getting eyeballs to their site. So if my video is on that site, that doesn't help me because it's on somebody else's site, but actually it did. And they had this massive land grab where people started to use YouTube so they could put videos on my site. So they really piggybacked in a big way off the success of my site. They made somebody else's platform better, effectively. They improved my site, and as a result, they became the best-of-breed video portal and got bought by Google, and well, the rest is history. Wikipedia is obviously a classic example. It's a long-tail play, so this is the idea that there are enough people on the internet that there's no niche too small for someone to be excited about something on the internet. That's kind of Wikipedia. The reason why I mention it here is I've never seen wikis really take off in a big way inside of the enterprise. So I've never seen a successful wiki deployment inside of a company. And I don't really know why. I can sort of speculate. I kind of think that for wikis to succeed in a true wiki way, you have to have extremely large numbers of users. And even at the energy company I work at, 150,000 is just not enough to have the critical mass to drive peer editing of web pages via a wiki. And so companies that do have wikis, what they typically do is they have a wiki, but then they hire a few editors to come and maintain the wiki, and that's kind of not what it's about. That's not what a wiki should be about. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later on about SharePoint and wikis and how that goes. So LinkedIn's the final one I wanted to mention. It just IPO'd at 11.6 billion, so it's a pretty impressive company again. And they really differentiate themselves by being the business. They were the suit compared to the Facebook party outfit. And they differentiated enough. And I think they've done a fantastic job of really navigating to their niche and really providing a specific need that people have. They don't have your LinkedIn profile isn't about your friends necessarily, it's a different graph. It's your professional network instead. And that's a key differentiation again. And it kind of shows that Facebook does have trouble trying to work out how to support multiple graphs in one. They haven't quite cracked that yet. Lists don't work. They've got this groups thing which is kind of working. But it's difficult to have multiple graphs, friends, professional, all in the one place. So Twitter's got a different graph, LinkedIn a different graph, Facebook a different graph. So here's a couple of the ones that have fallen by the wayside. So MySpace. So MySpace, the big contrast for me, the big reason why one of the big reasons MySpace failed is I think that there were lots of reasons, but one of them was that they gave in to their users too much. And I think the biggest example for me was that I can imagine if you're doing a site like my site and you're creating a profile to people, that the first feature request they'll ask for is I want to be able to customize my profile. That would be absolutely the #1 request you get from end users. Has Facebook done that? Not really. So even right through to this day, you can't really customize your profile page on Facebook. Could you on MySpace? Absolutely. You could customize everything. What happened? It made your eyeballs bleed. Okay, going to MySpace was one of the most painful experiences ever, because the background and the colors and the music that would play, it was just a disaster. So the whole usability got lost in this sea of amateur art, you know. And so really MySpace sort of ignored their users. That #1 feature request they should have just ignored. So that was one of the key reasons I think why it didn't work. They're also a victim of network effects. You know, in that kind of with the Facebook model there can be only one, and that's why I think Orkut will fall by the wayside too. Is that, you know, it's a bit like a fax machine. Having one fax machine is useless. There's no benefit having one fax machine. If you've got 2 fax machines, it's a little bit more useful. If there's 100 fax machines, right, that fax machine that you've got starts to become a lot more useful. And if everyone's got a fax machine, then you've got incredible utility out of that single fax machine. It's the same with social networks, it's the same with Facebook. If you're on there, there's a little bit of value. If one of your friends is on there, a little bit more. If all of your friends are on there, that platform becomes incredibly useful. And so the network effects are really now kicking in, and that's what means Facebook will really dominate. Delicious stagnated. That's just a great example of Yahoo buying them up, and then they just never did any more. It just died. They just didn't add features. They didn't keep pace with what's going on around them. And then Google Buzz was an interesting one that Google released. You know, Google have made a number of missteps on their way to becoming social. And Buzz was a really big misstep. So Buzz was really meant to be their Twitter killer. It was meant to be Twitter for Google. But the problem was that to try and kickstart the network, they decided that they'd pick people that you would follow. Okay, so they automatically, as soon as you signed up, you were following a whole lot of people right from the beginning. And the way they did that is they went through your email and they worked out people that you emailed with the most, and they added that onto your follow list. Which is great, except if your wife doesn't know that you've been emailing that other person behind her back. And all of a sudden she can see the follow list. It's like, who's that person on your follow list? And we joke, but that's exactly what happened. Is that a lot of people had their personal relationships exposed that they didn't want exposed. And so the whole thing was dead on arrival. It never took off because people really felt that was an incredible breach of their privacy, and it was. Crazy to think that Google can make that sort of misstep. They also made a misstep with Wave, which was kind of a, well, no one really knows what it was, but it was definitely, from a technology point of view, it was pretty interesting, but it never really found a spot in the market. Okay, so what I tried to do is sort of say, okay, well, those are competitors to SharePoint. So let's build a big matrix and sort of work out where SharePoint competes. You know, it does well here, it doesn't do well here, it does do well here, but it just became ridiculously difficult to do that. So what I thought I'd do instead is just put out some of the real positives about SharePoint and then contrast that with some of the real negatives and some of the challenges on SharePoint. And actually there could be some really interesting discussions about this. So the #1 reason why people buy SharePoint is this first point. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Is SharePoint the best blogging platform? No way. Is it the best social networking platform? No way. Is it the best wiki? Nope. It's not really the best at anything, except the best at doing everything. That's kind of what it's good at. And believe it or not, that's really important inside of organizations because you want to be able to unify the experience. Integrating software systems is one of the biggest challenges that IT consultants have. If you have to integrate, if you've ever done any integration with SAP, for example, you know that your problems are only just beginning when you know that the tables are done in German. Okay, there's a lot more problems than just that. Integration is really tough. So if you can have one platform that's just integrated by default, then that's incredibly valuable. There's also a lot of positive constraints. You know, the blogging platform might not be particularly good, but when you're dealing with an audience inside of organisations who don't blog every day of their lives, some of those restrictions, much like the 140 characters on Twitter, that can actually be a reason why it succeeds. So the less it does, it can actually make it more useful. And that's definitely the case with SharePoint. The blogging platform, I think, is good enough for enterprises. It's also built for the enterprise. So things like governance, it's on-premise, the security around SharePoint is all baked in. It's also a rich platform for partners. So I've been doing a bit of work on this lately. There are more than 4,000 partners that build solutions on top of SharePoint. So if SharePoint isn't good enough for you, we'll go and find someone who makes SharePoint good enough for you. And that's kind of the story as well. And obviously they integrate tightly with Office. So that's the good news. That's the main reasons why SharePoint's been the success it is, the fastest growing server product Microsoft's ever had. But the negatives are that no single feature is best of breed. It's got an incredibly long release cycle. And I think this is one of the most interesting things. I think no IT conversation is complete without talking about the cloud. Okay, I think we're all probably sick of hearing about the cloud. But as Microsoft moves the product into the cloud, they've got an incredibly big challenge. There's multiple big challenges, but one of them is the long release cycle. On the one hand, they've got enterprise customers who don't want a new release every 2 years. That's too soon. And on the other hand, they have people who are on a cloud-based system and they want new features almost daily. They're used to Facebook, where no one knows what version Facebook is. Facebook is not version 173. Facebook is just a constantly, daily evolving software platform. So Microsoft got a real challenge there. How do they balance their cloud customers with their on-premise customers? I don't really know the answer to that, but that's going to be a big challenge. Cost. If you compare the upfront cost of SharePoint and the ongoing maintenance cost of SharePoint, that tends to be it's becoming more and more difficult to justify when you compare that to the software as a service model, where you just pay X bucks per head per month and you get your software, you get your infrastructure. SharePoint doesn't work yet on that model. Office 365 was just released, which will start to work on that model, but it's still going to be quite expensive.
So how much cost, sorry?
Yeah. I don't even know. I mean, to be honest, I really don't know how much SharePoint costs. I think the price depends a lot on what sort of customer you are, whether you're an enterprise customer or just buying it off the shelf or what. And then,
It's a bit different between that.
well, SharePoint's cheap, and I think SharePoint, the actual product is cheap, but what's expensive is the hardware you have to buy and the people who have to support the hardware, and then the vendors you have to bring in to help you support the hardware. And that's sort of where the expense really starts to multiply. And that's the expense that you don't have if you're just buying it for $5 a month per user from someone who's doing that for you in their data centers. And I think the challenge Microsoft will have on a cost base, even if they move to the cloud, is that when you're operating on the cloud, you're kind of competing on how efficient your software is, on how much electricity it uses. Because if everyone's just got these big, massive data centers, it's very much about electricity. And SharePoint isn't the most efficient piece of software that's out there. And when you compare that to the likes of what Google has, where it was built from the ground up to be massively multi-user, it's just not going to be able to compete. Microsoft will not be able to get the efficiencies out of that software to compete with those other products. So it's going to be a big challenge. That's sort of the cost story. It's going to be a big challenge from both sides for Microsoft. And they're more a follower than a leader, and that sort of comes from the fact that even 2010, well, it's already a year and a half old, and no one's, it hasn't got better in that year and a half. So it's going to be another year and a half before there's a new version, and again, or maybe longer. And so it just falls behind so quickly. Anyway, there are things you can do. So basically, there are 3 strategies that I sort of wanted to talk about, but one of my demos failed, so I've only got 2 strategies for you. One of them is that you can embrace what's going on the internet. So the demo that I had for that was you've got a My Site inside of SharePoint. So isn't it great if you can populate the My Site, the information about you can populate that from LinkedIn. So I just had a very simple demo. You click a button, you plug SharePoint into your LinkedIn profile, and it downloads everything from LinkedIn, and it populates your SharePoint profile for you. So that's sort of embracing what's going out on the internet. The next one is that you can extend what SharePoint does. And this is a good example of extending. So what I've done here is just written Twitter for SharePoint. So I've taken the product Twitter and I've tried to emulate what Twitter does here on SharePoint. So I'm going to go across to my virtual box, and right over here I have SharePoint.
So how much RAM memory in your laptop?
How much what, sorry?
How much RAM memory?
I've got 8 gig in mine.
Sorry?
8 gig
8 gig.
with an SSD, i7. So what I've got here is a SharePoint site. So I don't know how familiar people are with SharePoint, but this is SharePoint. And I'll take you through an example. So I might be a small company. I'm only maybe 30 people, but I sell a product globally. And I've got a dispersed sales organisation. So I've got some salespeople in the Asia Pacific region, some in Europe, some in India, some in the US. And we want to be able to talk to each other. And we like Twitter. We use Twitter a lot. But we don't want to use the public Twitter for communicating within our team because that will reveal sales information. So what I need is Twitter for SharePoint. I've just bought Office 365, which is the hosted version of SharePoint. It costs me, I think it's about $6 per head per month. And that would be perfect. If only I could have Twitter sitting on there on SharePoint. So with the solution I'm about to show you, what that person could do is go to Site Actions. They could go to More Options. And going down to Blank and Custom, they'll see that they've got this TeamTalk solution here. And that's the solution that I've installed. If you hang around, I'm going to show you an app store, which will show you how this gets installed. Okay, but let's just say it got installed some way. So I'm going to select TeamTalk from my list of templates, and I'm going to give it a name. So this is Twitter Demo, and Twitter Demo. And I'm going to go and create the site. And away it goes. So behind the scenes, SharePoint is grabbing the template, it's unpacking it, and it's creating a brand new site for you, which hopefully is going to meet our needs as far as a Twitter solution for SharePoint. And here it is. So what we've got is a text box, which we can only write 140 characters in. So that's fantastic. I'm going to make an update now. This is an update. And I'm going to click on the update button. Away we go. So now I've started to create my stream. So here's my stream of messages starting to appear on the left-hand side here. What I can do is go down to that message, and I can actually reply to that message. So here's a reply. Okay, this is a reply. Oh no. This is a reply about SharePoint. So I've just used a hashtag and click on update, and away we go. So now we can see a few things have happened. There's a reply. So we've got the @ syntax for replying to administrator. Because it's mentioned me, it appears over on the right-hand side here, because it's mentioned me inside of the Twitter, and we've got a new hashtag created, which is SharePoint, over here on the right-hand side. So we've got most of the main functionality that Twitter needs running here inside of SharePoint, potentially hosted on Office 365. Now this wouldn't work for a big company of 150,000 people. Okay, this is designed for small organisations, just as Office 365 is. But it didn't take long to build. I think this is really the opportunity that Office 365 provides for developers like myself and that are in the audience here today. This took me about 5 days probably to build. That's it. And all I needed to be able to do was just write some JavaScript. So the whole solution is built using JavaScript. SharePoint has a pretty sophisticated JavaScript object model that then talks to some pretty sophisticated SharePoint web services to make this sort of thing possible. And for me, I'm very biased, as you'll see later. But for me, I think there's an incredible emerging market which isn't really fulfilled by other solutions out there in the marketplace today, in that SharePoint is a really quite innovative platform for small business that want web solutions. I can imagine lots of solutions like this, whether that's leave applications or expense applications or all these sorts of things that people like us in the room can build and put in the hands of small business to help make their business a lot easier. And in some ways, I'd love to see I've got iPhone envy. I'd love to see what happened in the iPhone space with their App Store. I'd love to see that happen on the SharePoint space as well. I believe there's an incredible untapped market there, that all they need is just a few little bits of grease on the tracks, and it will take off. But we'll come back to that later. Anyway, you can build these things. This is available free. You can download it and take a look at my terrible JavaScript and get a bit of an idea about how you can build something like this. But it's not hard. It's very straightforward. All right, so the good news is I have another demo. So, going back to social computing.
So one question.
Yeah, sure.
That application that you just showed.
Yep.
Will work in SharePoint 2010 as an organization, or it also works in Office 365.
Works in Office 365. Works on any SharePoint you can imagine, basically. Yeah. So the nice thing is actually, you're working at a big energy company with SharePoint. They've got very strong controls over SharePoint. They don't like people customizing it, because if you customize it, it can do bad things to your server. But this sort of solution doesn't need the IT department. You don't have to talk to the IT department. You can go and download the Twitter solution inside of your company, install it on SharePoint, and IT never need to know about it. So it's incredibly powerful, and that's kind of because you can't really do anything to damage the servers. It'd be pretty hard to write a bit of software that would damage the servers using the techniques that I used there. And so this is a big thing about, so I'll just go into a bit of technical stuff. So this is one of the nice things about SharePoint, is this model. It's opening up the ability to customize to everyone without risking the servers, because we're in this multi-tenant world where there's lots of people sharing the one server. The other way they've done that is with this thing called the sandbox. I think the sandbox is pretty useless in its current version, but moving forward I think it's very powerful. So what you do is you write solutions. You can even write C# solutions, compile them down as DLLs, and then you can install them into your SharePoint site, even on Office 365. And then Office 365 runs your code within a safe sandbox. So you can run C#, you can do all these things without actually having a detrimental impact on the server that you're running on. So it really opens up a lot of opportunities for C# developers if you're allergic to JavaScript to build these sorts of solutions as well. And it's sort of, the other thing it kind of does is it rebalances the relationship that we have with administrators. Because I think we've probably all been guilty of building a fantastic solution, giving it to the administrator installs it on the servers with your absolute assurances that this is well tested and fully functional software, and then something breaks. And when it breaks, who gets the phone call in the middle of the night? The administrator. And we don't get the call. So by using techniques like JavaScript, web service, and the sandbox, then the administrator doesn't worry about that. They won't be woken up in the call in the middle of the night because you did something wrong in your code, because it's safely locked away inside of the sandbox. So yeah, we can go crazy with these sorts of solutions. So the next demo is all about driving user adoption. I usually consider myself to be pretty lucky to be on the IT, the technical side of the business divide, rather than on the business side, because the hardest thing in IT isn't writing the cool solutions, it's getting them deployed and getting people to use them. It's a really big problem. It's a pretty tough thing to do. And so what I've got here is an idea that applies social solutions to user adoption, trying to help us get people to use the solutions that we build. And much like I talked about earlier, where I look back in time to find solutions to problems, I also look across industries to find other solutions to problems. So user adoption is a big problem. I'm sure it's not just us in IT that have that problem. What other industries have a user adoption problem? Well, it turned out that a user adoption problem exists in the gaming industry, okay, in computer games. And so what was typically happening is that people would write a computer game, maybe Halo, okay? That computer game would have 80 hours worth of gameplay in it. And people would buy the game, they'd put it into their Xbox, and they'd play it, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, through to Z, and that would take 40 hours. So they'd play the game for 40 hours, they'd take the CD out of the box, put it in the thing, put it on the shelf, they'd never touch it again. There was 40 hours of gameplay left unplayed. Okay, that's a user adoption problem. The people weren't getting out of the value out of the software that they paid for. So what they did is they came up with a solution to that. So if there's any gamers here in the room, you might know what that solution was, but the solution was achievements. So rather than just playing the game from start to finish, what you would do is you'd start the game, you play ABC, you take an incredible detour to go into this incredible cave, shoot 7 zombies in the head and 1 in the kneecaps, and come back to get the zombie killer achievement. Now, it may not be the sort of thing that motivate us, but without doubt this totally worked on the Xbox. And the number of hours per game went up dramatically. And people would take those achievements and they'd share them with their peers, and they really got a big warm fuzzy glow at achieving something in the game. So what I've decided to do is see if we can smash together Xbox 360 and SharePoint, and see if we can apply the concept of achievements to SharePoint to drive user adoption of SharePoint. So effectively what this means is that can we boil down the most positive things that people do on their intranet, and then can we award badges for that behaviour and to encourage people to do those things on the intranet. So here's my example. What I've got over here is a guy called John Smith, okay? And this is the My Site page on SharePoint. So this is where you go, it's like your profile page for Facebook, but for SharePoint. There's another page over here, which is my content, where I'd store information that I work on inside of SharePoint. And what you'll see is that there's a web part over here on the right-hand side called rewards, okay? But at the moment, I haven't got any rewards. All right, so I obviously haven't done anything positive on my intranet. I haven't contributed to the intranet in a positive way. So let's see what happens when John does make a positive contribution to the internet. There's lots of things he could do. He could tag a document, he could comment on a blog, he could do a blog post. But one of the things he could do is update his status. So this is an update to my status. All right, and I'm going to press enter on that. It's a bit like Twitter, just nowhere near as powerful, but it's a bit like Twitter. I've updated my status. I've told all of my colleagues what I'm doing at this particular point in time. Behind the scenes, what happens is that SharePoint's got this thing called an activity feed, which is pretty much like the news feed inside of Facebook, Whatever you do on the SharePoint intranet gets captured into like this audit trail, which goes into your activity stream. So you can go back through there and see when you uploaded documents, etc., etc. That's what we need. That's a piece of application infrastructure now that we can build this sort of solution on top of. So what I do is I dig into the activity stream and I can see what people are doing on the intranet. And based on that, I can run it through a rules engine and then decide if someone gets a badge or not. So when I refresh the page now, what should happen is we should see the activity stream get updated. So here's the activity stream updated to say this is an update to my status. Now that it's in the activity stream, I can grab that from my achievement code and give that person a badge. So here's the most anxious moment in my presentation. Okay, this is the demo that could go wrong, just to prepare you in advance. All right. But what should happen is when I click on the My Content tab, we should see that John has been awarded an achievement. All right, are you ready? All right, work with me here. All right, so I'm now going to click on the My Content and ta-da, there we go. We've got that, thank you. See, I can always rely on Brazil. You guys are very enthusiastic. All right, so there we go. So exactly. So John now has got the Town Crier badge. So he's now telling everyone on his intranet that he's contributed, he's made a difference, he's updated his status. And again, you might be sitting there and it's going, you know what? I don't really care about those stupid badges. Okay, there's no way I'm going to be doing it. But if you're in the military, it's all about badges. You want to get those different things on your arm. If you're at school, you want to get the smiley badge. If you're a Boy Scout, you want to tie lots of notes. This is just something innate in our human nature. Okay, we love to get rewarded, and we love to collect things. And often I ask in the audience how many people collect things, and I had someone the other day who collects M&M containers. He's probably watching this now, I don't know, but I'll tell him I mentioned that. But yeah, he collects M&M containers. So again, there's just something, whether it's train spotting or coins or postage stamps, there's all sorts of stuff we collect. We just love it. So we collect badges and we like rewards. So the combination means that at least a certain percentage of your user base is going to be motivated by this. And often getting solutions to work means just getting that initial critical mass. It's just getting enough people to use the systems for them to start to take on a life of their own. So this just could be one technique you can apply to start to get people to use your systems. I'd also love to spend more time with this badges thing and do things like, there's badges, you're not really sure how they got them. There's like the mystery badge. And people have to do something on the internet in some combination in order to get the badge. And again, they learn more about how the systems work by doing that. So I took this one level further, and that is that I created a league table. Okay, so this is sort of the next great leap that you could do. You could weight different badges and different activities and say, well, this activity here is worth 7 points and this activity here is worth 10 points. And then you could start to accumulate so everyone gets a score as far as how good they've been at contributing to the internet. This works great for geeks, okay? I mean, there's some fantastic sites on the internet that have been very successful by making effectively their site become a type of game. I don't know if it'll work on the average enterprise, but hey, it might be worth trying because user adoption is just that hard. So there you go. So you can see that. All right. So a couple of final slides before I'll give you a demo of the App Store, just quickly. One thing you often hear about when you talk about social computing inside of big companies is that it's a waste of time. That if you're on social computing, if you're on a social network, you're probably wasting company money. And there's no doubt that people, when they're sitting in front of their computers inside their offices, there's no doubt they're doing things on Facebook, on Twitter, on all of these sites, without question. And no one's going to necessarily defend that. But there is a flip side. And the flip side is that when people are at home on those same networks, they're also doing work. So it's a bit of a give and take. And I certainly, personally, when I go to visit a customer, I consider the value that I'm bringing to that customer, not just the fact that I'm there working for them and consulting for them, but actually I've got this incredible network behind me on Twitter and things, and that if I've got a question I can't answer, I can probably find the expert in the world who knows that bit about SharePoint and talk to them on Twitter and get an answer for that customer. And so we all do that in our companies as well. We bring not just the value in our head and our talents and all that, but we potentially bring a network as well. And we all know how important networks are in business. It is an incredibly well-established thing that you get a good network, go do some networking, those sorts of things. So there's a flip side. We also need to provide viable alternatives. So you can't just tell people not to use those tools. You can't just lock down your firewalls and your proxies and stop people from doing it. They'll find ways around it. You need to provide viable alternatives as well. So SharePoint could be the platform that helps you provide those viable alternatives. Because like it or not, we are, as internal company developers, we're competing with external apps now. And one thing's for sure, the apps that are running on the internet are 10 times better than any apps I've seen inside of companies. I mean, there's a massive gap in usability and those sorts of things there. I want to just have one mention about governance. I don't know if you guys come across it very much. In the SharePoint world, everyone constantly talks about governance. Governance basically means we don't trust our end users. We want to lock down the system so they can't break anything. So when you're going through the sales cycle, you sort of go, SharePoint, yeah, that's great. I want this, yep, must have that, must have that, must have that. I'm going to buy SharePoint because it does all of these things. Now let's deploy it. Okay, great. Let's lock down so that SharePoint can't do any of these things. It's very typical for big companies, and I see it just time and time again that they buy the platform for reasons which they then don't use when they deploy it. And it's not really SharePoint's fault. And so, on the whole, what I see is a lot more damage is being done by people locking down their systems than I see by people opening it up. And good examples here is that, you know, I constantly have these discussions with people. They're like, right, we'll deploy SharePoint. Yep, anyone can create their own site. Yep, go for it. Create your own site. Which is effectively analogous to creating a folder in a document, in a directory. Okay, so it's a pretty basic thing to do. Oh, actually, when we do that, we need to be a bit careful because they might use a swear word in the site name. It's like, no one's going to use a swear word in the site name. Okay, don't worry about people using a swear word in the site name. Or, okay, well, let's let them put web parts on a page. What about if they put 60 web parts on a page? It's like, they're not going to put 60 web parts on a page, you know, or you release a blogging platform. What about if someone comments on something that they shouldn't be talking about on that blog? They're not going to do that either. In fact, even, you know, the energy company we worked at, there was a blogging platform now in production for three or 4 years. We had maybe 2 instances where there was information we needed to take off because it was inappropriate. People don't abuse things, generally speaking, inside of the intranet because it's all linked back to their password, their username. It's accountable. It's a very accountable thing. So I think that we should take a bit more risks and we should have less governance in the SharePoint world because that's where I think the harm's being done. All right, so that was the end of the second section. What I wanted to do next is take you through a bit of a demo of something that we've built called Sharevolution, which is the world's first app store for SharePoint. So, yeah, we've been working on it for a long time, and I don't really talk about this very much because often when I'm doing community events, I sort of think the last thing you want is for me to be trying to sell you something. And I hope you don't feel like that at the end of it because I actually see this more as an opportunity for all of us, in that really this is born out of the frustration I have by having produced lots of little tools on the internet, but finding no way to really monetize those tools. Because it's very difficult for me to set up a payment gateway, to create the contracts, to effectively become my own little micro ISV. You know, it's a big deal to go and do that. And as a result, it's a real shame because there have been some fantastic tools we've published, but they've just wilted and died because people will call me up and say, hey, Daniel, can you improve this? It's like, actually, I've got a paying customer. I can't afford to go and do that. I need to work for my paying customer. So, you know, I don't really know if we're the company that's going to build the app store for SharePoint that takes off and wins and succeeds and all that. In fact, I really doubt it because I think that it's an incredibly ambitious thing, way beyond the scope of my little company. But if we start the fire and it goes from here, I think that somebody else will definitely create this store. It's amazing that Microsoft hasn't created this store. So with all that said behind the scenes, let's go into a bit of a demo. So what I've got here is SharePoint. Okay, and this is running on Microsoft servers. Okay, so this is actually the old version of BPOS now. As of this week, this is the old version of BPOS. And you know it's running on Microsoft servers because you can see the URL at the top there is the Microsoft server. So there's absolutely no way that I can build some C# code and put it onto that server. Okay, it's impossible. It's completely outside of the realms of possibility. Microsoft locked that all down. And people typically look at a SharePoint site like this and they don't really see that they can do much with it. You know, I can upload a few documents, great. You know, I can create a calendar, fantastic. But actually, like you just saw with that Twitter solution, there's a lot of fantastic stuff we can do by using JavaScript and the web services, even on the old version. But then the problem becomes that you can build the solutions, but they're really difficult to install. I mean, they're not difficult in terms of there's lots of hacky registry hacks or things like that you have to do. It's just difficult in terms of, you know, I find SharePoint hard. So I'm not going to be able to follow a 17-step document to install a template into SharePoint. It's just, you know, the UI in SharePoint isn't great. Okay, it's not hard, it's just not great. It means you've got lots of steps. So we sort of felt we had these problems we had to overcome. You know, we had to make people aware of what was possible to develop on top of SharePoint, like the Twitter application. We had to make it really easy for people to install the solutions, and then potentially we could monetize that and build these little dream careers for people like you and I who want to have our own micro ISV, building solutions for small business. When you say App Store today, people expect one click, right? So they expect, I like my solution, I'll click a button, it's installed, and I'm done. That's kind of the expectation people have. And that's the expectation that Apple, in all of its amazing UI glory, has created. And so we weren't going to be able to do an App Store if it didn't have sort of one-click simplicity. And that's pretty much, no one really knew that that was possible with SharePoint. So I guess I'm just trying to set a bit of SharePoint background. It's quite a challenge what we're able to do. So here it is. Here's Sharevolution. This is our store. It's online right now, so you can go to sharevolutionhq.com and take a look at it. It's been live for a while, and we're working on it for about 18 months or 2 years. I hate to think just how long we've worked on it for. But it looks pretty much like any other store you've probably come across before. So let me just log in so I can streamline the demo. Okay, this is like the man behind the curtain. Just ignore this bit. I wanted to have this prepared, but it timed out in the background. So I'm just going to log on. And here it comes. So, yeah. So the key thing is, it looks like any other store. If you go to the home page, you've got the products listed, you've got featured products, you've got the best sellers. It looks like a standard web store, and it pretty much is at that point. It's got all the core functionality you expect from a web store. So if I scroll down, there's the best sellers, latest products, all of that. Let's say we wanted to find TeamTalk. You know, I installed TeamTalk earlier. I did that Twitter solution. Let's say we were looking for that. So what I could do is I could come over here and go, right, let's search for a solution like Twitter. I'm that salesperson, I'm looking for the Twitter solution. Great, somebody has put in the store a solution for SharePoint that does Twitter-like stuff. So I'm going to go take a look at that. So I click on the link, and you can see here we've got a bit of information about the solution. So it gives us a description. And down here it's got some screenshots. So we can see the solution before we actually go and install it. And it's really at this point that it starts to get different from any other store that's out there on the internet. When I click on the Install Now button, we pop up this set of options. So on the right hand side you've got download, and that's right now that's kind of the traditional way that you get SharePoint solutions. You download it, it'd have a README file, and you do 20 steps, and then you'd have the solution. So let's ignore that for the minute. The more important bit is what we've got over here on the left hand side, which is this direct install technology. So what I can do is, if this is the first time I've come to the store, what I can do is do the drop down, and I can add my site. So I can actually tell Sharevolution about the SharePoint site that I have. I can tell it about the BPOS site that I've got. So I'm going to come across here, grab the URL, and I'm going to paste that in there. And then it needs to have an account. So I need to give it access to my SharePoint site because it's going to be installing something. So I'm going to enter in my username and enter in my password. Now, it's entirely reasonable that you don't want us to have your password. And actually, we don't want your password either. So by default, we don't store your password. We'll ask you to enter that in each time you try and do something in our store. Alternatively, you can create an account inside of BPOS specifically just for doing this stuff, and then enable it and disable it. There's a few ways to manage it. It's not ideal, but it's where we're at right now. People will give you their password for a Mars bar anyway, so it's not a big deal. So I'm going to store the password for the demo purposes. So the next thing I need to do is enter in a name for the site. So this is going to be our Twitter demo again. So I'm going to enter in the name, and then I'm going to click on the install button. Now behind the scenes, we're doing all the hard work for you. So we know about the template, we know where your SharePoint site is, we have access to your SharePoint site. So those 1 to 20 steps that you previously followed, we're compressing all those down for you so that they're job done. So right now it's come back and said that we're finished, the site's ready for you to go. I can click on the View Site button, and what we should find in a second is that over in our BPOS environment, we have a Twitter solution provisioned, up and running, and ready to go. It's coming. It's Microsoft servers, okay? They're slow. It's nothing to do with us. And there it is.
What permissions do you need?
Site admin permissions, very high permissions. Yeah, very high. So this is the old version of Twitter, okay? But you can see we can come in here and say, this is a tweet, and click on update. And it's a working, live, functional solution. So again, just think, if you can build that leave application, that expense application, that travel booking application. There's a lot of small customers, and I'm a small business myself, so I know I'd pay $99 to make my timesheets a lot easier to fill in. And if there's 1,000 different options I can choose from, then that's great. It's kind of like the App Store. That's what I've got on my iPhone. I like that. So that's just one example of the sort of solution we do. There's other things we can do from the store as well. So what I'm going to do is close that down. let's say I want to change the look and feel of my site. This happens on WordPress a lot. So WordPress has an amazing number of sites that do themes. And like for $10 a pop, you can get a new theme for your WordPress site. So here's a red theme that I can apply to my SharePoint site. So I'm going to click on the red theme and take a look at it. And you can see here, okay, we've got screenshots. That's kind of the look and feel I want. So again, I'm going to install the theme. So I click on the Install Now button. I've registered my site with ShareEvolution. I don't have to tell it about my site again. So I can use the drop down, choose my site, and click on the install button. Away we go. Behind the scenes, we've packaged up that theme, and actually it's more than a theme, it's an entire master page. So when you've got a master page there, you can embed JavaScript into the master page and do all sorts of very cool things with the whole UI. So you could reinvent the SharePoint UI and make it a lot friendlier if you wanted to, if you were that way inclined. So you can see now that we've done, I can go to my SharePoint site. Here's the home page. When I refresh, we should see we've got a brand new look and feel applied to our SharePoint site. There it is. Pretty quick and easy. Thank you very much. So, if you don't like the SharePoint site, then what you can do is come back here, click on the rollback button, go back to your SharePoint site and refresh, and you're back to where you were as if nothing had happened. And there it is. Very quick and simple. 2. Fantastic. So it's pretty cool. You know, it's just very, very ambitious and very difficult. This whole, you know, got this big problem where there's no customers coming to the store because there's no solutions. There's no solutions in the store because there's no customers. So who knows where it's going to go. But you know, I think regardless of whether ShareEvolution is successful or not, I think it's worth thinking about. But I think there's this incredible opportunity. Because if you believe that Microsoft is going to be successful with Office 365, and make no mistake, Microsoft is betting the business on Office 365. They're betting the business on the cloud. They have to find a way to translate the incredible momentum and success they've had from products like Exchange and SharePoint and Lync. They have to translate that into the cloud model. If they're going to be successful, if that is successful, there's got to be an app store. Because Microsoft is a business built around their partners, and it's a business built around their developers. And they can't do the relationship they used to do, where they manage the relationship with 4,000 plus partners and I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of customers in the cloud world, because they're going to have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of developers and millions of customers. So really that partner role becomes an app store. You know, they have to be, the role that's in between their customers and their developers is that app store role. So it's going to happen. When and who makes it successful, I don't know. But it's an interesting space that's coming up. Anyway, there will be an app store. So you can start writing apps today and get going. So there you go. Wow, this is really one of the longest presentations I've done in a really long time. So, yes. Is there anything you guys wanted to talk about around anything that we covered off and all that?
Okay, you've got your app store.
Yeah.
How expensive is it for us to write apps for it? And then what sort of penetration are we going to get?
Yeah, well, you can see the downloads. We've got a very impressive 355 downloads, so that's the penetration answer. You know, it's very much like the Apple. You know, we're not innovating a business model here, so it's really just copying Apple's business model, which is if you put a store in, you put a product on us, then we'll take 30%, you get 70%, job done. That's it. So it's that simple, really. As far as where the customers will come from, you know, it's very difficult to get a product like this out there with our sort of budgets, but one thing we're looking to do is we're working with hosters. So one thing that's happened is there was an incredible number of Microsoft partners that host SharePoint. And before the Microsoft cloud, there was third-party clouds. You can go and buy SharePoint from a company that's not Microsoft. And they've all had a pretty tough time. They're all doing very well, but it's a tough time for them now because Microsoft's come in and commoditized the SharePoint hosting market. So we're talking to them about how they can evaluate and differentiate their business in the market by having a store, especially for them. And by doing that, well, from day one, you might have access to their 100,000 customers to sell your solutions. And then you start to solve half of the problem.
That sounds good.
Exactly, that sounds good. I'll let you know when we've had a breakthrough. That's bloody hard work as well, but I'll let you know when we had a breakthrough. That's sort of some of the things we're trying. Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, well, it's just doing what other people do. I'm just applying it to SharePoint. So it's, yeah.
Don't reinvent the wheel.
No, well, exactly. And the one-click install stuff, even that's not that hard. If you're technically minded, you can probably work out how we did it, but just no one else has done it. So the other thing we're doing, by the way, is we've taken that technology too, and we've made it into a client. So if you've written a solution yourself for the cloud, then you can just use our installer to get rid of your installation instructions. So all of that technology, they can run it on their desktop. So they run install, and it just says, right, where's your SharePoint site you want to install it to? Point it, and away it goes. And then you don't have to give us your password either. So the download option in the future will actually be, you can download everything and run it from your PC and talk to your SharePoint, and then we're not involved. You don't have to give us your password. You might not even have to enter a password, and it's all one-click simple. And we'll give that away for free. So even if you don't use our store, you can still use our install to get yourself up and running quicker. So look for that soon.
You should target your end users rather than the IT.
Yeah, the targeting the end user thing, that's just a really hard thing. You know, I don't know how to talk to Ma and Pa at the fish shop who've just bought an Office 365.
Well, I mean, even in an organisation, like
Yeah.
these type of things, when you've got all these different teams, digital marketing and all the rest of it, and, you know, your IT guys mightn't go doing that much with it, but if they see this sort of thing, that's the avenues that they're heading down now.
Yep.
They'll come to them and they'll want it.
I hope so. It's still just really hard to start a conversation with that broad an audience from where we're coming from, you know. Yeah, exactly. Well, we do have some stuff built in, and well, sadly we're a pretty busy company too. We do lots of other things. This is kind of a bit of a side project, but anyway.
When is the site going out of beta?
No, we probably won't move it out of beta, because while it's in beta, if anything breaks, we've got an escape clause, you know. So I'm not really big on moving it out. A bit like Google, really. So I don't know. We'll be releasing the Office 365 support hopefully in the next month or 6 weeks. At the moment, it just runs on the old version, but we'll dump that and only support Office 365 in the next month or two. So, and then we'll also bring. We haven't got PayPal in there right now, but we'll have the PayPal integration too. So that's the way that will work. So yeah.
How the model works? If I want to in your store, I have to pass like some kind of test.
Yeah, see, that will come.
To avoid to upload crap.
That will come, and it again is the reason why Microsoft needs to have something like this, because the alternative is people can't find anything. But when they do find something, it's coming from some source which probably can't be trusted, you know. And so one thing that a store can do is it can be in the middleman there, and there's a certain level of trust that you have from going to a store which has a governance process in place, which means that the solutions are checked before they go on the shelves. So we absolutely see our store doing that, but we haven't done that yet. So, you know, we haven't yet come up with the tick this, and done. But you don't have to do, there's no specific way of developing software for our store. You just develop it just the way you normally would with SharePoint, and then give it to us, and away you go.
You put that on your one-click and
yep. Yeah, but we just use standard SharePoint development techniques. There's really not much we have to do. We don't have to touch your solution as you gave it to us. Yep.
It's a better way for Microsoft too, probably, to have stuff out there that's compatible as they upgrade and move forward.
Well, what you get, so behind the scenes as well, we track the installs. So one thing we'd love to do in the future is, again, like the iPhone, rather than having to remember to download the latest version and upgrade and all that sort of stuff, the store can automatically tell you, hey, you've got 7 solutions installed that are out of date. Would you like us to install them for you? And brrr, goes into the updates. So you can see I've done lots of demos, but it tracks every single installation I do behind the scenes. So that's a possible thing we could do in the future. Yeah. We'd love to. Yeah. Cool. Well, you've done really well, guys. I don't know if I could sit out there and listen to me for as long as you have. So thank you very much for spending the time with me this evening. I'm going to be hanging around, so if you guys want to have a chat about anything, then yeah, let's catch up for a bit of a chat. But yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.